What really happened behind that fleeting moment? One so subtle it almost went unnoticed, yet powerful enough to leave millions of army around the world silent, questioning and sensing something was different in a bond that once seemed unshakable. A second that felt too long. A glance that no longer felt the same. A small movement that somehow triggered a massive wave of speculation. And at the center of it all, one unavoidable question echoed louder than anything else. Why did Jungkook pull away? It all began with what initially seemed like an ordinary situation. The members were sitting together, the atmosphere relaxed, conversations flowing lightly as usual. There was nothing suspicious. Nothing that hinted at the beginning of something emotionally unsettling. And yet, that's exactly what made it so strange, because the biggest shifts often begin in the most ordinary moments. Taehyung, with a calm yet meaningful expression, started to open up a topic that felt different. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't appear angry. But there was something in his tone, something deeper, more personal, more honest. And that was the moment everything changed. Jungkook, who had appeared relaxed just seconds before, suddenly showed a shift so subtle yet unmistakable. His gaze drifted away. His body leaned back ever so slightly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. But it was enough for anyone paying attention to feel the unspoken tension in the air. That question instantly flooded the minds of fans. Was there something we didn't know? Did Taehyung's words touch on something Jungkook had been quietly keeping to himself? Or was this part of a more complex dynamic hidden beneath their usual smiles? What made the situation even more unsettling was Taehyung's reaction afterward. He fell silent for a brief moment. Not because he didn't know what to say, but as if he was processing what had just happened. His eyes didn't carry the same light as before. There was hesitation. A trace of hurt, subtle but undeniably present. Did he realize his words had made Jungkook uncomfortable? Or did he already know that bringing up that topic would lead to this kind of reaction? Speculation exploded. Observant army began dissecting every second of the moment. Slowing down the video, studying expressions, reading body language. And the deeper they looked, the more questions emerged. Some believed Jungkook simply felt awkward because a personal topic was being discussed in front of everyone, a completely human reaction. But others saw something deeper, a sign of unresolved tension beneath the surface. And amid all these interpretations, one thing became clear. This wasn't just an ordinary moment. Because if it were just simple discomfort, why did Jungkook's expression look so different? He didn't just look away. He seemed to withdraw, creating a distance that hadn't been there before. A distance that felt unfamiliar to those who had long witnessed the closeness between him and Taehyung. And Taehyung's reaction afterward became the most emotional turning point of all. He tried to smile. He tried to continue the conversation. But something couldn't be hidden, a quiet disappointment lingering beneath his calm expression. Something that made many fans feel a heaviness in their own hearts. Was this a sign of change? Or was it simply a rare, honest moment revealing that even the strongest bonds have fragile sides? Some fans began revisiting their past interactions, searching for patterns, looking for clues. And interestingly, certain small moments from the past now felt different when viewed through this lens. Glances that once seemed ordinary now felt meaningful. Jokes that once seemed light now felt like they carried something deeper. And all of it made a possibility, once unthinkable, start to feel real. What if there had always been something left unsaid? But on the other hand, some tried to approach it more rationally. They reminded others that being public figures means living under constant scrutiny, where even the smallest gesture can be misinterpreted. That not every expression holds deep meaning. That sometimes people simply need space. And maybe that's what Jungkook needed in that moment. A need to protect boundaries. To keep something private that he wasn't ready to share. To hold on to a part of himself that remains his own. But if that were true, why did Taehyung's reaction feel so emotional? That question lingered unanswered. Because in close relationships, boundaries can be complicated. What feels normal to one person may feel hurtful to another. What feels honest to one may feel overwhelming to the other. And perhaps, that's exactly what we witnessed in that moment. A collision between honesty and comfort. Between openness and boundaries. Between two individuals who, despite their closeness, may navigate things differently. But what made it even more powerful was how deeply it affected the fans. ARMY didn't just watch. They felt it. Many expressed shock. Some felt sadness. Others felt like they had witnessed something they weren't meant to see, something too personal, too real. And that's where the paradox lies. As public figures, every moment can become public consumption. But as human beings, not every moment is meant to be seen by everyone. Was this one of those moments? Or was it simply a reminder that behind the perfection we see, they are still human, with complex emotions and untold stories? As time passed, the discussions didn't fade. They only grew stronger. Every detail analyzed. Every possibility explored. And through it all, one thing remained constant: curiosity. Because despite all the theories, no one truly knows what actually happened. Only they do. Only Jungkook knows why he chose to pull away. Only Taehyung knows what he felt in that moment. And perhaps, it's precisely that uncertainty that makes this moment so powerful. Because sometimes, what remains unspoken carries the greatest impact. And maybe, beyond all the speculation, all the analysis, all the emotions, this isn't about a major conflict or a dramatic shift. Maybe it's simply about two people who, for a brief moment, weren't on the same wavelength. A silence that spoke louder than words. But for those who witnessed it, that moment will continue to live on, questioned, analyzed, and felt. Because in a world under constant spotlight, even a single second can change everything. And yet, the more people tried to move on, the harder it became to ignore the lingering weight of that moment. It didn't fade like a typical viral clip. It didn't dissolve into the endless stream of new content. Instead, it stayed quietly, persistently, like an unanswered question that refused to be forgotten. Because something about it felt unfinished. In the hours and days that followed, fans began noticing something else, something even more unsettling. It wasn't just about that one moment anymore. It was about what came after. The subtle shifts. The almost invisible changes. The kind that only those who have watched them closely for years could truly recognize. Jungkook, usually expressive in his own quiet way, seemed more reserved. Not drastically different, not enough to raise immediate alarm, but enough to make people wonder. His laughter, though still present, felt slightly delayed. His reactions, though still warm, carried a hint of restraint. Was it intentional? Or was it simply the natural aftermath of an uncomfortable situation? And then there was Taehyung. If Jungkook's change was subtle, Taehyung's was complicated. He didn't withdraw completely. He didn't create distance in an obvious way. In fact, on the surface, he appeared to carry on as usual. But there was something in his eyes, something that flickered in brief moments when he thought no one was paying attention. It was as if he was choosing his words more cautiously now. As if he was aware, deeply aware of the impact they might have. And that realization alone was enough to stir emotions among fans. Because when someone who has always been unapologetically open suddenly becomes careful, it raises questions. Did that moment change something between them? Or did it simply reveal something that had always been there? The silence between answers became louder than any explanation could have been. Some fans began revisiting old footage, not out of mere curiosity, but with a new perspective. They weren't just watching anymore. They were searching. Searching for patterns, for clues, for anything that could help make sense of what they had witnessed. And in doing so, they began to notice something unexpected. But was this real, or was it the result of overanalysis? That question became a dividing line. Because for every fan convinced that something deeper was happening, there was another reminding everyone of a simple truth. Not everything needs to have a hidden meaning. And yet, human emotions are rarely that simple, especially when they unfold in front of millions. There's a certain vulnerability that comes with being seen, not just physically, but emotionally. And perhaps what made this moment so impactful wasn't just what happened, but the fact that it wasn't meant to be dissected on such a massive scale. Because what if this was never meant to be a moment at all? What if it was just a fragment of a much larger, more complex reality that we can only glimpse pieces of? That thought alone shifts everything. Because suddenly, it's no longer about who is right or wrong. It's not about assigning meaning to every glance or movement. It's about acknowledging that what we saw might only be a fraction of the truth. And that truth might be far more human than we expect. Perhaps Jungkook didn't avoid in the way people assume. Perhaps he simply needed space in that moment, a brief retreat to process something internally. A reaction not of rejection, but of self-protection. And perhaps Taehyung's reaction wasn't solely about hurt. Perhaps it was a moment of realization. An understanding that even honesty has timing. That even closeness has boundaries. If that's the case, then what we witnessed wasn't conflict. It was adjustment. Two people navigating the delicate balance between openness and comfort. Between being themselves and being mindful of each other. And suddenly, the narrative changes. Because instead of a fracture, it becomes a moment of growth. Instead of distance, it becomes awareness. But even that interpretation doesn't fully erase the emotional impact of what fans felt. Because regardless of the truth, the feeling was real. And sometimes, feelings don't need confirmation to leave a lasting impression. As more time passed, newer content began to surface. New interactions, new moments, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension that once felt so heavy began to soften. A moment of ease that reminded everyone of what they had always seen before. But even then, something had changed, not necessarily between them, but in the way people perceived them. Because once you've seen a moment like that, you can't unsee it. It becomes part of the narrative, whether accurate or not. It lingers in the background, quietly influencing how every future interaction is interpreted. And maybe that's the real impact of that moment. Not what actually happened between Jungkook and Taehyung, but what it awakened in the people watching. Because perfection, while comforting, is distant. But moments like this, uncertain, emotional, open to interpretation, bring a sense of authenticity that perfection never could. So maybe the question was never meant to have a clear answer. Maybe why did Jungkook avoid isn't something we're supposed to fully understand. Because the truth might not lie in a single explanation. It might exist in the space between perspectives. Between what was seen and what was felt. Between what was said and what remained unspoken. And the more that sense of just enough lingered, the more it seemed to blur the line between reality and interpretation. Because what happens when millions of people witness the same moment, yet walk away with completely different conclusions? The answer is simple, yet unsettling. The moment no longer belongs only to those who lived it. It transforms, expands, and begins to exist in countless versions, each shaped by emotion, perspective, and expectation. And that is exactly what happened here. Some began to see it as a quiet turning point, a subtle shift in a relationship they had long believed to be effortlessly synchronized. Others insisted it was nothing more than an ordinary human reaction magnified beyond proportion. But the most intriguing responses came from those who found themselves caught in between, unable to dismiss it, yet equally unable to define it. Because there was something undeniably human about the discomfort. Something relatable in the way Jungkook seemed to retreat, not dramatically, not coldly, but instinctively. The kind of reaction that doesn't come from calculation, but from emotion. From that sudden, internal realization that a line, perhaps invisible, perhaps unspoken, has just been crossed. And if that was true, then the question shifts once again. What line? Was it a memory? A topic too personal? A truth revealed at the wrong time? Or was it something even more complex, something not tied to a single moment, but built gradually over time? The possibility that it wasn't about that moment at all, but rather everything leading up to it, began to quietly settle into the minds of those watching closely. Because no reaction exists in isolation. Every pause, every glance, every hesitation carries history within it. And perhaps that's why Taehyung's expression felt so layered. The kind of recognition that comes when something you may have sensed, something subtle, something unconfirmed, suddenly becomes visible in a way you can't ignore anymore. He didn't force the moment into something bigger than it already was. Instead, he let it pass. And that choice might be the most telling detail of all. Because sometimes, the decision not to react says more than any reaction ever could. And in that silence, a new layer of complexity was added, not just to the moment, but to the way people began to interpret their dynamic as a whole. Because what does it mean when two people, known for their closeness, suddenly navigate around something instead of through it? The ambiguity refuses to settle into a single answer. And maybe that's why it continues to resonate. Because it reflects something deeply familiar, something that exists in all human relationships, no matter how strong they appear from the outside. That even the most genuine connections require constant, silent adjustments. And perhaps what made this moment so powerful wasn't the possibility of conflict, but the quiet evidence of that adjustment taking place in real time. And for those watching, that rawness was both captivating and unsettling, because it stripped away the illusion of simplicity. It reminded everyone that what they see is not the full story. That behind every interaction